In the winter of 1886, when the American nation was still trying to outgrow the shadows of civil body could be restarted. He scrawled equations across loose paper, comparing the heart to pistons, the lungs to bellows, the brain to a telegraph relay. His attic smelled faintly of lamp oil, ink, and something far less innocent, the chemical tang of preserved specimens. The town's older folk, veterans of war and disease, muttered that children should not meddle in such matters. Yet whispers followed him, because whispers always cling to those who carry secrets. The local minister claimed the boy had eyes too old for his face. Some said they saw him in the graveyard by lantern light, copying names from tombstones as though collecting data for an experiment. Others swore he listened at funerals not for prayers, but for the sigh of death itself. What set him apart was not only curiosity, but discipline. While other boys memorized lessons by rote, he kept meticulous records of decay. He measured how long before a sparrow's body stiffened, how long before the stiffness gave way to looseness, how the skin darkened by the hour. Where others turned from such sights in disgust, he sketched them like a draftsman charting blueprints. To him, death was not a terror, but a puzzle, one he believed could be solved, and he would solve it, even if it meant straying into places polite society never dared look. By 1886, America was a land enthralled by invention. The telegraph had collapsed distance, the railroad had conquered wilderness, and Edison's electric light pushed back the night. Why, then, should death alone remain a mystery? For this boy, the attic became his workshop, and the graveyard his classroom. The question was not if he would make a discovery, but what price it would demand. To understand the boy, one must first understand the America that raised him. By 1886, death was not a rare visitor, but a familiar shadow in every home. The nation's soil was still thick with memory of the Civil War, where more than 600,000 had perished. Brothers, fathers, and sons buried in shallow graves or left unclaimed on distant battlefields. For a generation of children, mourning was stitched into daily life as tightly as lessons from the Bible. Epidemics struck with grim regularity. Cholera, yellow fever, diphtheria, and the dreaded tuberculosis, the White Plague, cut through households without mercy. In New England towns, funerals were so frequent that church bells sometimes tolled daily, a grim reminder that every family lived in death's shadow. Death did not wait for old age. It claimed children, mothers, Aside, observing as strangers in dark clothing held hands, as a medium closed her eyes and swayed, whispering in a voice she claimed was not her own. For the boy, this was no fantasy. It was an engineering problem. If the soul existed, perhaps it left a signal waiting to be detected. Still, the seances left their mark on him in one lasting way. He saw how grief made even the wisest men vulnerable. Lawyers, doctors, even ministers were known to sit in darkened rooms, desperate to believe a knock on a table was proof of life after death. To the boy, this was a tragedy equal to any burial. The dead deserved truth, not parlor tricks. And so he resolved that he would find a way, not through chants and candles, but through notes, wires, and instruments. In the age of spiritualism, millions sought comfort in shadows. The boy, however, sought answers in light, even if it meant following death into places darker than any seance. For centuries, questions of life and death had belonged to the church. Ministers preached that the soul departed at the instant of death, rising to judgment in heaven or hell. To question that doctrine was to question not only God, but society itself. Yet by 1886, another force rivaled faith: science. Electricity had lit the streets of New York, telegraphs had made distance vanish, and laboratories promised discoveries that once belonged only to the realm of miracles. rejecting false miracles while chasing a truth even scientists feared to touch. Where others saw God's will, he saw a puzzle. Where others bowed their heads, he reached for wires. And though he was still a child, the path he walked would lead him into places darker than prayer, deeper than experiment, into the silence of the grave itself. In the America of the 1880s, bodies were more valuable dead than alive, at least to the schools of medicine that needed them. Students at Harvard, Yale, and smaller medical colleges across New England required cadavers to learn anatomy, yet few families consented to dissection. Death was sacred. To cut open a body was to desecrate it. This created a dark economy. The resurrectionists, men who stole the dead from fresh graves and sold them to medical schools under cover of night. The newspapers occasionally printed scandals, families opening a coffin to find it empty, mobs surrounding medical schools with torches when whispers of grave robbing spread. Officials called it a crime, doctors called it a necessity, the public called it blasphemy, but for the boy, it was an opportunity. He had read about resurrectionists in secret, hidden among dusty journals and clippings collected by his late father, who had once apprenticed in medicine. He knew they worked in silence, striking graveyards shortly after burials when the earth was still soft. They moved fast, shoveling only enough to break the coffin lid, then hauling the corpse with hooks and ropes. By dawn, the body might be on a cart bound for a medical lecture, dissected not as a person, but as a specimen. For the boy, this was not horror, but possibility. If doctors needed bodies to learn, so did he. He had already filled notebooks with diagrams from books and sketches from animals. But to truly understand death, he would need to see the human body as more than carved stone and names on headstones. He would need to touch it, to study it, to know it as intimately as surgeons did. One night, when the town was asleep beneath a crust of frost, he crept from his attic with a lantern. He followed the narrow road to the churchyard, the same place neighbors swore they had seen him scribbling by moonlight. The graves lay in quiet rows, some marked with elaborate angels, others with only wooden planks. He chose one freshly turned, still damp with the scent of earth. He had no shovel, only a small spade and determination. He dug until the soil gave way to wood. His hands shook, not with fear, but with anticipation. He whispered notes aloud as if dictating to his own future self. Soil depth, time since burial, preservation state. At last he pried open the coffin. The lantern flame trembled. Inside lay the body of a young man, no older than a soldier, dressed in Sunday clothes. The boy stared not at the face, but at the body's stillness. A machine shut down. He did not take the body that night. He lacked the strength, the tools, the nerve. But he returned, again and again, sometimes only to observe, sometimes to sketch. Each visit hardened his resolve. Grave robbing was a crime, yes, but to him it was a crime in service of truth. If men stole bodies for money, why should he not borrow knowledge from the dead for science? In time, the townsfolk noticed lantern glows in the cemetery. Some whispered of ghosts, others of devils. But the truth was stranger. A boy with a notebook, charting the silence of the grave, preparing himself for discoveries no child should ever seek. By the time most boys his age were chasing marbles through dust or fishing along the riverbanks, the genius boy had already become a quiet fixture in a place no child belonged: the morgue. In American cities of the 1880s, morgues were not sterile laboratories, but dim, He was building data, a science of death itself. Still, he knew he was trespassing in forbidden territory. His mother never asked what he did after school, perhaps out of fear she already knew. The minister glared when he passed, muttering, "Sir." Dead, feeding on the living. If one family member died and others soon followed, it was not germs they live again. But secrecy was always fragile. Rumors spread in town that the boy knew too much for his age, that he whispered about things no child should know. A mother claimed he frightened her daughter with talk of blood and lungs. The minister warned that curiosity was a sin, a road to ruin. Some neighbors crossed the street rather than greet him. To them, his notebooks were not the work of genius, but of heresy. And yet, for all their fear, the boy could not stop. To him, an autopsy was not a crime. It was the purest act of science, opening the locked door of death and peering inside. He believed that one day the world would see what he saw, that the body was not sacred clay, but a system, and every system could be understood. It was this belief, daring, dangerous, and utterly isolating, that prepared him for the darkest experiment of all. Every obsession, if pursued long enough, demands a trial. For the boy, years of notes and sketches, of secret vigils in cemeteries and hours in the morgue, led him toward one conclusion. Theory was no longer enough. If death was mechanical, then it could be tested. And if tested, not entirely dead either. For a moment, the boy believed he had done it. His heart pounded with triumph. Was this the first step toward reanimation, the long-sought key to the lock of death? He leaned close, listening for breath, watching for the rise of a chest. But there was nothing. Only motion without meaning, a body made puppet by invisible strings. Still, he could not stop. He tried again, increasing the current, moving wires to chest, abdomen, and skull. The results were grotesque. The mouth opened as if to scream, the hands clawed the air, the others that he died young from an illness contracted in the very rooms he haunted. A few, whispering late at night, claimed he went too far, that his final experiment succeeded, and that what came back was not the same as what was buried. American history offers no certainty. There are clippings of grave-robbing scandals, court cases against resurrectionists, and public panics about tuberculosis vampires. There are reports of doctors quietly experimenting with electricity on corpses, and of spiritualist seances filling parlors across the nation. Within those shadows of truth, the boy's story hides comfortably, as though it might have been real all along. Perhaps he was only a child prodigy, drawn to science in an era when the line between discovery and blasphemy was thin. Perhaps his tale was a morality story told by townsfolk, a warning against curiosity, against prying into matters best left to God. Or perhaps he was something more, a symbol of the restless American mind, caught between faith and invention, unable to accept silence as the final answer. In the decades that followed, science marched forward. Germ theory replaced vampire lore. Forensics turned autopsies from scandal into necessity. Electricity became commonplace, no longer the magic spark of life, but the power behind lamps and machines. Staring into the silence of the grave, not with fear, but with determination. Whether he succeeded or failed, whether he lived or was lost to his own experiments, we cannot know. What remains is the question he carried, the question that has haunted mankind since the first grave was dug. Is death final, or is it only unfinished work?